Welcome to the DE Talk podcast. Tune in for dialogue between HR experts to amp up your HR strategies. Don't worry, we'll mix in a few laughs as we know you need it. Welcome to the DE Talk podcast. I'm Candee Chambers with DirectEmployers Association. With 2021 in the books, we're looking ahead at what federal contractors can expect in 2022 and what curveballs may be lurking around the corner. Here joining me today, I have John C. Fox of Fox, Wang Morgan, resident employment law expert and longtime DE partner. If you read our weekly blog post, the OFCCP Week in Review, you know that vaccination mandates have taken over as employers, states, and OSHA go head-to-head. And while this remains a huge topic of discussion across the board, we have so much other news to cover. So let's dive in. Gosh, John, in 9 days, Joe Biden will have been president for 1 year. And Jenny Yang will also celebrate her first year as the OFCCP director. It was a year of OFCCP slowly getting comfortable with itself as staffing and budget challenges beset the agency. COVID-19 kept the OFCCP workplace out of the office as OFCCP joined the 43% of the federal government which worked from home, as all the while the agency played wrecking ball to rid itself of all things Trump. We reported on that constantly in our Week in Review. I think we called it a couple different things, a flip-flop meter, and we changed that because of some people not really liking that terminology, but it basically was that. We kept going back and forth, I guess, is a better way of describing it. So, John, as the Biden OFCCP now begins the 5th full month of the first full fiscal year it is planned, budgeted for, and led, what do you see coming down the pike at OFCCP for the remaining 7.5 months of OFCCP's fiscal year 2022?
Well, Candee, thanks for having me. This is a great topic. And, you know, Jenny Yang has fought a very slow motion delay and delousing action, as I'll call it, since taking office, trying to undo everything that was Trump. That's a government-wide initiative, not limited to OFCCP, but most of the regulatory, most of the policy decision-making has been just what I'll call defensive, just playing defensive volleyball, stopping what is coming over the net at the Biden administration, just turning back everything to where it was as President Obama left office. And a new thing happened here that has made this more pronounced. We haven't quite seen this ever before in modern history, and that is as the Trump administration left office, it littered the freeway with all kinds of obstacles for the Biden administration to spend their precious first year in office. It's always precious to every new incoming president because that's when they've got their mandate from the people and they can take action. But the Republicans typically are just content to be satisfied that they manage the government well under their tutelage, and they don't typically try to leave legacy obligations or to obstruct the incoming administration. But the Trump guys did, and they left a lot of debris, and you're seeing the agencies one by one go about the task of turning it back. But keep in mind as to this slow motion delay issue, that all levels of government, from towns to cities to counties to state governments to the federal government, have all been operating as though they're just working in jello. They're just embedded in a mass of jello and moving slowly, and their sound is, and their voices and their actions are muted. And OFCCP is no exception. The state and federal agencies just do not have the electronic systems to work remote like most of the private sector white-collar workforce has been able to do with great success. I mean, you hear from almost every client, every member, their revenues are up, their profits are up. They've done well during the pandemic. If you're manufacturing and you got to go sit at a job or have a restaurant or some retail service, you've been hurt. But if you're a white-collar remote worker, this has been a very good time, but not for the federal government. But it's not unique. It's just what has occurred. And state and federal agencies have slowed to a crawl everywhere you look. Just this week, the IRS announced, for example, that it is woefully understaffed following the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that tax returns would take a long time to process this tax season, and refunds will be slow. This is a sure way to, yeah.
My husband last night, it was on the news, and he said, well, I guess we won't. It doesn't really affect us because we haven't had a refund in a long time. And I was like, yeah, really. But they did say that people will get interest, thank goodness. My daughter actually had to wait over a year for her refund a year ago. So.
Everywhere you look, the immigration service processing visas, anybody trying to go to a courthouse, gosh, they don't even serve the complaints now for 4 or 5, 6 weeks often. But not sending back tax returns on an expedited basis is a sure way to anger Americans with our fascination with taxes. But no one in the federal government intends that, but that's the reality that's unfolding in this understaffed federal government, which is operating very awkwardly and in slow motion. The other thing that's key to managing in the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think the federal government has been very, very slow to pick up on just generally, is that it requires a different kind of manager than we have trained and brought up through the ranks historically. The COVID-19 manager obviously has to be innovative, has to be ready to quickly pivot and make work appealing to his or her workforce, since we now have 4 million Americans that have left the workforce purposely and consciously. You've got millions of jobs coursing through the NLX pipe at DE every day, and they are going unfilled as we see the number of jobs being filled only hovering around 200,000 a month. If they just took all the jobs that DE has available, you could fill 2 million tomorrow. But that's not what's happening. You got to find ways to lure people to want to come into work. The successful COVID-19 manager we've seen in the private sector has to have the courage to break with tradition and find a way to make a way forward. OFCCP managers are just learning this now. But they've got to pivot, and they've got to make it appealing, as you've done so successfully, for example, at DirectEmployers. I mean, you've done a lot of things differently that I think 2 years ago you would have never done. I mean, you were a staunch opponent of remote work, and look how you quickly pivoted and embraced it and made it work. But managing in this environment is a challenge, for any organization, since we just have not trained managers for what has unfolded. And I think that's going to continue to haunt the federal government and the Labor Department until they start getting innovated and figure out how to work in this environment. It's not just a 2 or 3 week tunnel like we thought in March of 2020. We're now coming up on 2 years and probably more successive waves of variants. So that's the new reality. But you got to keep morphing with each wave after wave of depressing COVID-19 news. And I think the 4 watchwords for managers these days is resilience, innovation, what I'd call positivity, and connectedness. As we're getting farther scattered, we've got to be more and more connected. But that's what's driving successful organizations. And I don't see a lot of that discussion going on in the federal government. They're not finding the way to lure people to work, and almost every federal agency is understaffed at this point. For its part, OFCCP's 3 main missions to date in the almost year of this first Biden OFCCP administration has been to do 3 things. Undo everything Trump, as you mentioned. That's the delousing mission of OFCCP that leadership there perceives it needs to undertake and undertake first. And that will continue, as I'll specifically mention in a moment. There's still things to undo from the Trump world in the mind of the OFCCP managers in Washington. Then number 2, they need to hire up to deal with a fleeing workforce like everybody these days. OFCCP is authorized, as you know, to 451 employees, which, by the way, is a very small number. When I was helping to run OFCCP, I had 1,000 people reporting every day, and I had 400 alone reporting to me in Washington, D.C. through 4 different fully fueled divisions in the national office.
John,
but they felt a fewer,
What's really interesting about that is that there have got to be so many more federal government contractors today, and less than half of the total number of employees that are overseeing the regulatory requirements of that larger number of contractors, which right there tells you how difficult that is, plus all of the additional regulatory requirements that they have to undertake, the contractor community. So, I mean...
Yes, you're quite right, Candee. I mean, federal contracting has been increasing as the federal budget has been exploding in size over the last 25 years. And as we've used the government contracting mechanism also as a way to fuel the economy, it's another device to help invigorate economic growth. It's been a key strategy. But OFCCP has fallen last year to fewer than 400 employees. They were hovering around there and then dipped below for a bit. And so they're hiring back right now, but they're not adding to stock, if you will. They're just doing replacement hiring and still have a long way to go. And they're fighting a very difficult battle, too, because the morale is very low at the agency. And a lot of people are very much looking forward to retirement. This is going to be a big year of retirements at OFCCP, it appears, just because of the age of the managers and the duration of time they've been in the federal government, and they all want to get out. District director after district director tells me they literally count the days down until they can retire. It's not what you like to hear if you're a manager of those managers, but It's the reality that's on the table. And the third thing that OFCCP has been out to do, and they've stated this very clearly and very candidly, that they want to get a plan to run the OFCCP. We had the last two managers hit the ground running very hard, very fast in, I would say three, actually, going back to the Bush administration. You had an OFCCP director who had been a federal contractor, affirmative action plan manager for a large company, and Mid-Atlantic Bell, and used to sit in my National Employment Law Institute affirmative action briefing annually, and was studying everything there was about OFCCP for years in the back row in Washington, D.C. I remember him there for years and years and years.
Charles James, right?
Charles James. Mm-hmm. He knew exactly what to do when he walked in the door. He was one of three managers of OFCCP directors who ever knew what OFCCP was and could tell the difference between an affirmative action plan and a telephone book. Then came Pat Shue in the Obama administration, and she was very knowledgeable about discrimination law. She had been an employment lawyer, actually, in the firm I had been in San Francisco, and didn't have to do much study on that. The affirmative action side of the world was new to her, but she had plans in action before she arrived in Washington. I had lunch with her a month before she took office, and she had it all mapped. She was ready to go, spring-loaded. And then you had two different directors in the Trump administration who knew what they wanted to do pretty quickly. They were both well-trained in discrimination law, learning about the affirmative action side of the House, but sprang into action rather quickly. And one of the things that's now happened to us all, and will continue this year, is what seems like silence from OFCCP, because Pat Shue in the Obama administration and Craig Lean in the Trump administration published and came up with new policy ideas weekly. We could barely read all the literature that came out of the Obama administration that we can review was filled with OFCCP stories every week, and we could just barely keep up with it all. And we've gone from that kind of a frenetic pace to a almost quiet that you see very little published.
But you know what, John? I don't think it's Jenny. Because Jenny has a civil rights background, a discrimination law background, and an EEOC chair background, and she's very smart. And I thought that she would come right in and do the same thing, especially as Pat Shue. But, then we also started kind of expecting Pat Shue's remarks to be presented to her by the White House, because there was a lot of control over what they publicly said. I think Jenny is just suffering some of those same types of controls, but those controls now have been elaborated upon. And now that, I think she's doing work behind the scenes that maybe we haven't seen yet. But I think that just in the times I've met Jenny and talked with her, I know she has a lot of ideas, and I know they're going to be working on some initiatives for people with disabilities that Craig Lean, I think, started. And they're working very hard behind the scenes, I believe. But I think she's been not able to voice a lot of her ideas publicly because of some of the other things, obviously the vaccination situation and COVID-19. I think other things are taking a back seat. I mean, the IRS. If the IRS is taking a back seat, other agencies like the OFCCP are definitely going to. Don't you agree?
Yes, and she's basically been under house arrest. OFCCP has always been disliked within the Labor Department because its main mission at the Labor Department is employees and unions. The unions don't like OFCCP, never have, because they've always been afraid that OFCCP is going to meddle with seniority. When you try to order retroactive seniority in a discrimination failure to hire case in a unionized environment, they just go nuts.
Well, and there you have it then. Marty Walsh is a huge labor proponent. So,
of course.
Yeah, so there you go. And
the Labor Department in Democratic administrations is almost always all about wage hour, and wage hour. OSHA as a secondary, but close second. But wage hour is considered the Rock of Gibraltar and what protects the vulnerable population, as they call it in the Democrat administrations. Pat Shue was different. Pat Shue broke the mold for Democrat OFCCP directors because she had a direct line to the White House. The chief of staff to President Obama was a personal friend of hers that she knew from Chicago, and he was running the White House policy and was a brilliant guy named David Axelrod, who plotted the whole Democratic course for years. And he used Pat as an instrument in that activity. And that was really the first time in modern history we had seen the OFCCP used as a political tool. And I'm going to show you some evidence of it now, because it's now the third generation with the Trump administration and now the Biden administration looking at OFCCP less, frankly, as an enforcement agency and more as a political tool to create messaging to the various bases of either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And you'll see that in looking at the proposed regulatory agenda that shines light on the major regulatory policies the Biden administration wants to pursue at OFCCP in the next 12 months. Let me start with the nearest policy initiative coming up first, and then work to those policy initiatives that OFCCP hopes to complete by the end of the fiscal year 2022, which ends on September 30th of 2022. October 1st will begin the new fiscal year 2023. This coming September 30th, 2022. And we wrote about this on our Week in Review, published Friday, December 13th, 2021, and cataloged all 5 of these initiatives that I'll just briefly mention. But you'll see the political issue bleed through here.
Right. I know what you're going to say, but go ahead. I might throw one in myself. So.
All right. Well, first, they're going to start very soon, they say, in the next month, with technical amendments to OFCCP's rules, which are long overdue. These are just cleanups to spell the names of the statutes correctly, get the jurisdictional thresholds updated, correct the OMB control numbers that have been assigned to allow each of these various pieces of regulation to come to be over the years. They've got they want to fix all the pronouns as well, but I'll call that a technical cleanup. They're promising that by February of this year.
That one doesn't.
OFCCP is running late. It will probably be spring.
Yeah, and that doesn't really seem to me to be that important. I mean, we've lived with it like this for quite a while. The one that I think is really important and a little disconcerting, I think, for the contractor community is their proposed modifications to their PDN rule, the predetermination rule. And I think that's going to be kind of interesting. I think all of the government contractor community was concerned about the transparency initiative that Craig Lean had put together, and is that going to continue? But with the PDN rule, it requires OFCCP to tell the contractor what the alleged violation is and give them 15 days to respond and say, no, that's not right. You didn't perceive it correctly. This is what's really going on. They can ask for an extension. It's easily extended because there's a lot of information. The one concern, I think, is that they don't issue the PDN until it's been to the national office and the national office has signed off on it. So it's one of those things, you get it, and I've told all of our members, don't ever try to respond to a PDN on your own. You've got to get legal counsel involved because the likelihood of winning, and I don't know, John, if you've had situations, but the likelihood of winning is lessened because the national office already has their eyes on it. But I think that's one that the contractor community is a little nervous about what might happen with that.
Yes, and the concern is that OFCCP is going to follow the path of the EEOC of reducing transparency.
Exactly.
The PDN rule requires OFCCP to write down their allegations that they believe they have evidence to prove against the contractor, and then present that to the contractor, let the contractor respond to it point by point, see the evidence, duplicate, replicate what the economic studies on the other side are, if it's a compensation case or a failure to hire case. A lot of statistics involved typically,
and the OFCCP
and they want to be able to replicate that.
Right, and the OFCCP has to give them that type of information to say, this is what we did, this is why we say that this is an alleged violation, right?
And OFCCP is clearly going to pull back on all of that because they want to play hide and seek with what they know and make you think that they know more than they really do. And contractors are going to be very unhappy about this, and OFCCP is just going to steamroll them, I fearlessly predict. The third thing is the prime contractor notification to OFCCP of subcontract awards. They're proposing to do that by spring. I think it'll be much later than that, but this will very much upset the subcontractor community and also prime contractors when the Carter administration tried to do this in 1979, and the contractor community went nuts because they did not want to have these prime contractors in the middle of OFCCP and using them to drop a dime, in effect, on their subcontractors and cause subcontractors to perhaps not participate in federal subcontracts. This rule is going to backfire on OFCCP if they do go forward with it, though, in my judgment, because what will happen is that many, many more companies that think currently that they are a federal subcontractor will find out that they are not, because the definition of subcontractor is very convoluted, but it can be boiled down, if one were to read all 8 laws.
Necessary too, right?
Yeah, that's one of the 2 definitions. But that definition has been narrowed by the case law to mean that you're only necessary to the prime contract or necessary to some other federal covered subcontract if it's legally necessary. Not that it's a good idea or it's useful to the project. Okay. It has to be mandated by law. An example would be an insurance company providing state law required workers' compensation insurance for the federal contractor, the federal subcontractor, to do the work, or a insurance company that has to issue a bond for, let's say, a construction of a federal highway. That's legally required to have that bond. So it's only those that are legally required subcontract, which eliminates about 95% of them all.
Well, and I think for corporate America, that's going to be very challenging because when I used to do affirmative action planning at my companies, and the OFCCP would always ask for a copy of your contract. Well, you could hardly ever find them, and then
Exactly.
and then each contract, if you have several subsidiaries, you have locations across the country, the contracts may be overseen by different individuals. You have different subcontractors for each contract. Trying to come up with a list of subcontractors is going to be next to impossible. I mean, finding the contracts was next to impossible.
Once you do identify them, then some lawyer, can't be HR, some lawyer is going to have to sit around and parse which one is a subcontractor meeting OFCCP's definition.
Exactly.
And they got to go read the nine case decisions that inform the answer to that question. But that all potentially lies ahead. Look for that realistically in the summer. But the fourth one is changing OFCCP record-keeping rules that they say they want to do by September of 2022. You can see they're really backlogged. This is something they wanted to do in the Trump administration, and it's not a high priority issue, but they really need to do this if they're going to follow through on the contractor portal, which they're intent on, and we'll talk about. But it's going to be reflective here of just how backlogged they are and how understaffed they are, that they can't just push this out, 6-7 months ago. Finally, here's the one that really reflects on the political control of OFCCP through the White House, and that's rescinding certain portions of OFCCP's controversial religious exemption rules for federal contractors and subcontractors. Jenny Yang and the president both said within days of taking office a year ago that the OFCCP religious exemption rule would be yanked and reformed. The concern there is from the Democratic Party side of the House that in a collision between a federal contractor exerting religious requirements for dress or for the non-hiring, non-employment of gay, lesbian, and transgender employees, that contractors were getting too good a deal in these rules that would allow them to escape the non-discrimination provisions of the Executive Order 11246. Those rules are written to rescind. It's easy to rescind those. They've already written it probably in the first 30 days they were in office. Why are they holding it until what? September of 2022?
Yeah, I don't understand that. Do you have any insight?
Well, what's the next month after that and the next month after that? That becomes November of 2022, the election,
I was just going to say,
elections. Yep. And so they're staging. The White House has programmed this to stage to occur to rally the base for the midterm elections.
Wow.
And meanwhile, this rule doesn't really play in the real world. There aren't that many federal contractors that claim religious exemptions. It's happened once or twice. I saw it once in the 4 years I was helping to run OFCCP, but it was a trifle of an issue, easily disposed of, and jurisdiction maintained against that company. But it's a great political issue. And so that's why it's being especially saved for that moment.
That makes sense. That'll be interesting. Well, John, let me ask you this. Do you think that the volume of OFCCP audits will ever return to their prior normal level? I mean, I think we're seeing just a handful each year. And gosh, when I was doing audits from the corporate America side, I would have 8, 10, 12 audits at the same time going on. And, some companies on the CSAO have 10 potential audits, but I don't know many. A couple of our board members have about 10 or 12 at any given time. But not a multitude of companies. So do you think it'll ever return to normal?
Not anytime soon. It is not because of a lack of employees. The volume of audits per OFCCP employee and per compliance officer has plummeted. I used to do 7,200 to 7,700 full on-site audits per year when I was helping to run OFCCP, with audit on-sites that lasted from 3 to 5 days on average. 2
people would normally be there too.
At least 2 people, sometimes 4 or 5.
I remember.
And now those are all gone. What's caused the change was Pat Shue went to a process that we talked about at some length in the Week in Review back in the day, the deep dive, deep dredge. Her view was different than Shirley Wilcher's in the Clinton administration, and I thought Shirley really had it right. Shirley's view was there's always 2% year in and year out, regardless of whether you're Republicans or Democrats, north, south, east, west,
so do a lot
violation
of
rates
yep.
for discrimination. So if 2% is going to be found with violations, let's just do more audits. 2% of 1,000 is a lot more violations than 2% of 100. So she'd kick the door down, look around. If there wasn't any discrimination, she'd get out. Pat Shue went the other way. She said, we're missing things, so let's dig deeper. And so she told the Congress in her budget reports beginning in 2014 and 2015 that she was going to slow it down. And she did. And now it's at a crawl. With the COVID-19, they're almost not doing audits. And the audits they've been doing have been the mini audits, compliance checks, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of OFCCP time per audit, times 500. They do fewer than 1,000 now per year. They had 500 compliance checks, focus reviews, which Jenny Yang banished within the first 2 months she was in office. The first 500 focus reviews and innovation of the Trump administration, they found only 2 technical violations total, no discrimination violations, nothing of substance. So you're seeing a very, very different auditing profile. There are still, as you say, a lot of the big companies that were caught up and are still fighting Obama-era audits.
That's true.
And
That's true.
Those audits are still unwinding. That process will probably complete this year. We may have a 10-year anniversary of finishing the Obama audits here pretty soon.
Yeah, cheers to
but it's taken a while.
Well, I'll tell you,
there's not going to be big volumes. There's not going to be big back pay numbers anytime soon until the philosophy of audit changes and they increase the number of audits per employee.
Yeah.
You can't have 400 plus employees and do under 1,000 audits a year.
Well, and then keep in mind the hiring that they're doing. I remember I was sent to do my first on-site audit after I only had 6 months of experience in the affirmative action business. I was scared to death, and it went beautifully, but nonetheless, I was scared to death. And if you've got, new employees and you're giving them audits to do, they don't know what they don't know, and they're following the FCCM, which has been updated, but still could stand additional updates. And, that's a difficult challenge for the new compliance officers. So it's, an ongoing problem that they're going to have with all of their hiring that they hope to get approved. So let's skip over the audit discussion, because I've held this last one of my last questions based on the biggest news that has come out of the OFCCP. And that's the AAP verification project. And there's 3 key dates that are coming up pretty darn quickly that we just published in our December 6th Week in Review. So we've got February 1. The portal is open for access registration, and that's where OFCCP is intending to send an email to each covered federal government contractor, and the email information they have available in its system, inviting them to register all of their locations, all of their establishments. March 31st, the contractors can begin certifying their affirmative action compliance. So they basically have 2 months to set all of their locations up in OFCCP's portal. And I know, John, you've got some clients with like 10,000 plans and 10,000 establishments, so God help them. And then by June 30th, all existing contractors must certify whether they have developed and maintained an affirmative action program for each establishment and or functional unit, and must affirm that the contractor understands that it may not later change its affirmative action plan after certification. I met with Jenny Yang about a month or so ago, and I told her that this was a concern about not changing your affirmative action plan. I actually suggested that they put some FAQs out to help contractors understand, because it's, penalty, it's a federal law to provide false information to any government agent. So, John, based on all of that information, what do you think is going to happen this year with the affirmative action plan portal?
Well, Candee, let me start with two things which ought to happen and won't happen. First, they ought to stop the process immediately and go to rulemaking. There's so many wrinkles involved in this thing, and the contractor community needs to have an opportunity to express itself about all of this and help OFCCP frame it up properly. But they've rejected that. They told the White House that they were not going to do that. They're proceeding ahead. The second thing they should do is at least delay this whole process for about another 6 months while they talk, at least informally. Even if you're going to push forward an illegal program, you can talk informally to the contractor community and get some better ideas. You saw the Baltimore ILG that we published in the Week in Review this past week, January 10th, had a lot of technical questions as do contractors across the country, which OFCCP then tried to answer through FAQs. But there's a whole host more of technical issues that people are running into even before they've tried to go online when it opens up in February to create their establishment pages and report data eventually and certifications. But let's talk about the two things which are going to happen. They are going to open on that schedule. That's their current statement, and I doubt that this close to February 1 that they would suddenly have a change of heart. Although you hope they would. Wisdom late is better than wisdom never. The second thing that's going to happen is that a lot of contractors, based on surveys of the contractor community, are not going to participate. And then OFCCP is going to be in a dilemma as to what to do with them. If they sue them, they will undoubtedly lose that lawsuit because they will have been found to not have gone through the rulemaking process that is required whenever you're going to impose a burden on the regulated community. So we'll have to see who plays and who doesn't. And then the end game on all of this, and I think this is confusing to contractors, but I'm not sure why, because when Craig Lean envisioned this, well, Pat Shue envisioned this first in the Obama administration. Craig Lean talked about it and set up the internal infrastructure in the Trump administration. And Jenny Yang then finally pulled the trigger with the White House, the Office of Management and Budget, in her administration. But they've all said from day one that they were going to use these data not to make discrimination findings, but rather to audit, and primarily based on compensation. They want to use it as a compensation discrimination finding tool. And contractors ought to applaud that, because where OFCCP makes its money is not in comp. There's very little compensation discrimination that OFCCP or any agency has ever found. It's all about failure to hire. That's where the money is. And that's where contractors have problems, particularly if they have entry-level production labor workforces and evergreen jobs. Oh my gosh, that's just a dialing for dollar situation.
Yeah, that's probably one of our members' biggest questions. Well, John, let me just say this, and it's kind of interesting because I was talking with one of your partners yesterday about rulemaking and the OSHA ETS and things like that. And I asked point blank if the Supreme Court doesn't approve that to move forward. He said, well, it will depend upon what their reason for saying that it's not appropriate. And if they say it's basically because they didn't go through rulemaking, then OSHA could say, okay, well, we'll go through rulemaking, which you and I have talked about earlier this year, that some of the other vaccination mandates ran into that same problem, and they decided, okay, well, we'll go through rulemaking and then we'll be good. And so, interesting, when I spoke with Jenny, she said, and you and I have talked about this as well in the past, that the OFCCP is saying that they don't have to go through rulemaking because the authority for them to do the verification already exists in the regulations. I know other lawyers, because Jenny's a lawyer, I know that other outside attorneys don't necessarily agree with that. But it will be very interesting in a legal situation if they are forced to go through rulemaking. I think it would be a very interesting exercise and see what comments they would receive. So I'm going to skip over that because it is what it is, and we'll see what happens come February 1. But let me go ahead and finish with this question, John. Since as a leader of direct employers, I know that budget is everything and that bigger budgets mean more success in the marketplace, happier employees, and more productivity. Success basically just begets success. Let me just make it clear, I'm glad I don't have Jenny Yang's budget worries or her budget challenges, because we fortunately have come off here at DE from a second in a row all-time high year of membership numbers, revenue growth, headcount growth, customer services growth. We've been one of those companies that has just succeeded amazingly so during this pandemic. And I even complimented all of our employees at our all-staff meeting on Monday that I think our collaboration is at an all-time high. And I think it's because you don't see that person sitting next to you that you just really want to argue with. You just have to pick up the phone or have them see you on Zoom. So I heard yesterday one of our folks literally was in an interview, the spouse was in an interview, and they asked him to stand up to see what he was wearing, if he really had a suit on, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So there have been a lot of fun things that have happened during the pandemic as well. But what do you think is going to happen to OFCC's budget and its hopes for basically a 3% increase in its budget and the dream of adding an additional 188 jobs to their headcount? What do you think?
Yeah, they wanted to go up from about 105 million a year to 143 million a year, and as they did with a lot of the federal agencies, but it's not going to happen. As you know, there's a continuing resolution in the Congress right now on the budget for 2022. They still have not settled and landed that budget. The continuing resolution means that they're just continuing the agencies at the prior year's level of funding. By the way, that's very bad news for an agency.
Because of the inflation, especially.
If you've got any increases in your cost of doing business, and as you know, inflation is raging right now, leasehold expense, payroll, pensions, all those go up about $2 million a year at OFCCP in modern times. So you do $2 million, what would that buy you? Well, $2 million is almost 20 compliance officers. So if you keep the same budget, you just lost 20 compliance officers. And the way they do that at OFCCP is that they don't fire people. They've got so many open jobs, they just keep lowering their headcount authorization from, let's say, 451 down to 431. And that accounts for the loss in budget due to the increase in cost of doing business. But they're not going to get it. The likelihood in Washington is that there's still going to be a stalemate on this. The Democrats have punted twice on the budget, and we'll take it up next in February. And the great likelihood, based on history, is that you never have a third continuing resolution. Usually at that point, the administration realizes that the Congress is not going to play ball, and so they just do a continuing resolution for the remainder of the year. So that will likely happen, in my judgment, but we'll see. But if they do get a budget, other than a continuing resolution budget, OFCCP is not going to get a huge dollop increase, nor is the EEOC. They're staffing currently against their last budget, and that's going to be probably their reality, as I say, which is not a great answer for OFCCP, but they need to motivate people, and they need to work with what they've got and bring those audit numbers up to at least what they would have in any normal use of personnel. So I think we're going to see a very difficult year for OFCCP. They're going to have to trim sail and not do all the things with the computers and not all the things with people and staffing that they wanted to. And they're also, as a final thought, staffing at the senior levels. They're staffing managers and not compliance officers. And that's not going to help audits, by the way, either, because managers don't do audits. And I'm not sure why they need that manager structure out in the field anymore, given the ability to work remote. And what they need is worker bees. They need a lot of those people. I begged the contractor community at the National Industrial Liaison Group annual meeting in Nashville last year to support OFCCP in its mission to try and get more budget, because I think the agency, and I've said this for almost 15 years now, is too small to run as a standalone sub-agency of the Labor Department. It's becoming almost what we used to call a bureau, something very tiny that has a small defined mission. But you need to put some more meat on those bones, and very soon.
All right. Well, thanks, John. It's another enlightening conversation with you. I think every single one of them is. But we like to end on a fun note with all of our podcasts. And I'm going to give you 5 rapid-fire questions so our listeners can learn just a little bit about what makes you tick. All you have to do is say the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, the best advice you've ever received.
Oh, to be cautious and not assume more than you know.
Okay, all right. Early to rise or a night owl?
Oh, early to rise. I've always gotten up, been on the job by 7 a.m. For decades. I'm usually up at 4:15 in the morning and in the gym by 5.
Wow, okay. If you had the opportunity, would you rather travel to the past or to the future?
Oh, absolutely to the past. I just think there's so many things fascinating about our history to date. The future seems less rich to me.
Okay. Street smarts or book smarts?
Oh, book smarts. I
could answer that one for you, John.
Yeah, but I love to read and I love to absorb and have always been a bookworm.
All right, this is going to be the toughest question for you of all. You wait till I finish. Chick-fil-A or Diet Dr. Pepper? You can only pick one.
No, I want the combo.
I know. I said you needed to listen till I was finished, and you can only pick one.
And that's a pure Sophie's choice. Do you want to pick your son or your daughter? Oh, my gosh. I'd have to go with Diet Dr. Pepper if I were forced at bayonet to a choice. But hopefully it's Diet Dr. Pepper at Chick-fil-A.
I've been there with you when you've had it, so I know. Well, John, as I said, it's been a real pleasure having you join us today and talk more about what's looming on the horizon for federal government contractors. I speak for DirectEmployers and our members when I say we are incredibly thankful for your insight and guidance. If an employer would like to connect with you, what's the best way that they can get in touch?
You can reach me at my phone number, 650-400-2121, or via my email, which is on our Fox Wang Morgan website. If you put that in your browser, will pop up. But it's JFOX at Fox Wang, that's W, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy, G as in Go, Fox Wang Morgan, like Captain Morgan, the rum, foxwangmorgan.com. Yeah, everybody always gets that because, oh yeah, we know that rum.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the DE Talk podcast. Stay connected with Direct Employers on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and subscribe to our emails by visiting directemployers.org/subscribe to receive notifications of new episodes each month.